Botswana's High Court has ruled that homosexuality is not a crime. Judge Michael Leburu set aside colonial-era legislation and ordered the law to be amended.
He emphasized that current laws denied dignity, liberty, privacy and equality to lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender citizens.
Botswana's highest court has decriminalized homosexuality in a landmark case, giving African campaigners for lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender rights a crucial win on a continent where homosexuality remains highly contentious. The High Court overturned a colonial-era law that punished gay sex by up to 7 years in prison. Justice Michael Leburu ruling that homosexuality is another form of sexuality that has been suppressed for years. President Masisi had signalled support for same-sex relations in a speech last December. But the decision comes less than a month after Kenya's highest court unanimously upheld a ban on gay sex, drawing strong criticism from the United Nations and rights activists. The conservative East African nation is one of 70 that considers same-sex relations a crime. Almost half of them are in Africa. Angola, Lesotho, Mozambique and Seychelles have all decriminalized anti-homosexuality laws in recent years. South Africa is the only country to have legalized gay marriage.
To talk more on this, we are now joined by human rights activist Katlego Kolanyane-Kesupile. Katlego, good evening and thank you so much for joining us on The Globe this evening. The way in which the judgment will affect activism work in the LGBTIQ community, do you think that the legal precedent set by the judgment will spare liberalism within society?
When we start talking, good evening, first of all, and when we start talking about what kind of effect it will have on the society, we must be very cautious of understanding where this ruling is most effective. We are talking about a constitutional ruling, and therefore, as much as we would like to believe that all of Botswana will then say, this is what the court says, this is what will be our norm, we've seen in numerous cases that we still need to do sensitization training. We need to do more grassroots work to ensure that institutions, organizations, and the general public are able to manage what the court has tasked them with. And what the court has tasked people with is to say, as much as the Employment Act had said you cannot discriminate against people based on their sexual orientation, now it says a person can come to work and showcase their partner without fear of being fired from that place of employment. And their colleagues will have to then just accept and understand that this is who this person's significant other is. So for advocacy, it's been a great move, but we do recognize that there's so many more things that we need to do moving forward.
The restoration of dignity and respect for privacy. Can you go into detail about that?
I think one of my most amazing things that I drew from the judgment was how it was unpacked. So as an academe myself, it wasn't a matter of this is what we're telling you as the people with the power or the legal power to say you must hear. There was a lot of rationalizing of what was put in front of the court and what the court drew from what was said based on the arguments that were provided by the plaintiff and the defendants and other scripts. So when people finally get their hands on the ruling, they will recognize that it wasn't just a fleeting judgment. It was a well-researched, multicultural, intersectional ruling. And so when we talk about privacy, privacy was now stripped from the clause that said that addresses soliciting sex in private or in public. getting people to engage in acts against the order of nature in private and in public. So they stripped it and said, let's move privacy away and say people deserve their dignity and freedom and liberty to practice their sexual activity and sexualities in private, because that is what has been given as a provision for all people who are heterosexual. And so for now, what we've got is that regardless of who you are having sex with or who your sexual partner is, as long as you're doing it in private, you are still allowed to do it. You're not a criminal. Whereas before, certain people were criminals and certain people could do it without then being questioned.
Katlego,
So this has been a victory for people.
Now, the fight against stigmatization, access to healthcare and treatment going forward, this is exactly what the judgment is giving.
So I think that's another thing. When we look at how LGBTQIA plus human rights related issues have been framed within the country, everybody thinks that we're trying to just advocate for the right to have sex. And that's not what we're talking about. We are talking about full citizenship. We're talking about being able to be included in national frameworks for health, with national frameworks for housing and landing, acquisition. We're looking at holistic life. And this ruling says, by way of not criminalizing people for who they are in relationships with or who they could want to be in relationships with. Because to be queer is not to be in a relationship. In the same way that heterosexuals don't have to be in relationships to acquire land. But there've been discriminations that have been put against queer folk simply because of the way that people perceive them as criminals. So this ruling says we are citizens who are able to just operate without having to feel as though, oh, would somebody judge me because they might think of me in a certain way.
Now, public opinion on same-sex relations, what's the reaction been like on the ground?
In the times of social media, it's very difficult to gauge what people's genuine reactions are and what people's heartfelt reactions are. Of course, people are running around making jokes because, of course, that's what you want to do when you're uncomfortable and you don't know how to properly verse your opinions. But for what we've seen, as Botswana has been long praised as a tolerant nation, we haven't had much backlash from people who would be considered people in positions of power. So what we're hoping is that the people who still don't quite understand what we are talking about or what we've been talking about or what the courts are talking about will give themselves the time to listen and learn. And once they know fully what this judgment means, they will realize that it's not special rights, as a lot of people try to say about LGBTQIA plus rights around the world, but they recognize that these are human rights and the instilling of dignity in a population or members of the population who have otherwise been called a minority because they just don't come to the fore based on trying to secure themselves against discrimination.
Speaking of learning, how can this judgment spur the drive towards more inclusive sex education in society?
In Botswana society, we would first of all have to get comprehensive sexual education going, which we must recognize that hasn't been happening. And so that will be a task for numerous ministries, not just the Ministry of Education or the Ministry of Health. We need to take on this task on a multi-party space. And so I hope that by way of decriminalizing same-sex sexual activity, we will be able to make sex education more than just moral education or religious education space, but take it into, biology, English, economics, accounting. When we look at what kind of couples we talk about, when we say this household needs to balance its affairs, we aren't just looking at mother needs to make this, father needs to make this. We give options of mother and father and father, so that people can start realizing that LGBTQIA plus people aren't just sexual beings. We are also human beings who engage in business. We are mechanics, we are hairdressers, we are lawyers, we are all of these other things, not just people having sex. And that's what I hope that this allows us to start to have conversations about.
Katlego, thank you so much for your time and for joining us on The Globe this evening. That was human rights activist Katlego Kolanyane-Kesupile joining us there via Skype from Botswana.